Hi, my name is Cheryl Chumley. On March 24th through April 9th of this year, I traveled to Israel to hear firsthand from the Jewish people how they were dealing with the aftermath of the Hamas terror attack. Here is what I learned. On October 7, 2023, Israel was attacked by Hamas terrorists. This was the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. Men, women, children, babies were murdered. Whole families were burned alive. Women and girls were viciously raped and tortured. Hundreds of civilians were taken hostage by Hamas. Since October 7th, more than 1,200 Israelis have been killed. But that doesn't even get into the figures for the IDF soldiers who were tasked to counterstrike against Hamas, thousands of who've since been killed and injured. And months later, Hamas is still holding more than 100 hostages in Gaza, including a handful of Americans. The Center for Strategic and International Studies wrote this: "The October 7th attack is the deadliest per capita terrorist attack since the Global Terrorism Database started data collection in 1970, with a rate of slightly over one person killed per every 10,000 Israelis. This metric adds context for the national impact of the attack and sense of loss for Israel. As President Biden invoked in his reaction to the attack, it is as if 40,000 to 50,000 Americans had died on September 11th. That's why Israel is calling the October 7th terror attack their own September 11th. And the fact that Biden even acknowledged that makes it all the worse how quickly his White House seemed to turn its back on Israel and grow impatient with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's insistence on eradicating Hamas by whatever means necessary. As Israel knows, you can't strike peace deals with people whose goal is to eradicate you, to erase you from existence, and to wipe your nation from the face of the map. Yet in January, Biden said he believed a two-state solution between the Israelis and Palestinians was still possible, even though Benjamin Netanyahu said it wasn't. In February, Biden warned Israel not to attack Rafah, where Hamas holdouts had dug in and hid. And a few weeks ago, in a telephone conversation with Netanyahu, Biden called for an immediate ceasefire by Israel in Gaza. Much of the world's governments are dealing in this double talk about Israel as well, saying on one hand that yes, Israel has the right to defend itself, but on the other hand, Israel only has a right to defend itself up to a certain point, to a point where the world's governments, some led by serious anti-Semites and terror group apologists and enablers, deem it enough. I wanted to be on the ground in Israel and hear and tell some of the Jewish people's stories firsthand. I was there from March 24th until April 9th, and my very first day was a lesson in the endurance of the Israeli people. I landed before noon local time in Tel Aviv, and I made it to my hotel in Jerusalem with enough time to meet up with a group who were celebrating Purim. Purim is the Jewish celebration that comes every year to recognize how God saved them from total destruction. It's a story that's recounted in the book of Esther in the Bible. And one of the first things I saw was that even though the nation was grieving their dead and injured and abducted from October 7th, in Israel, it's such a small country that every Jew there knows somebody who was murdered by Hamas, abducted by Hamas, injured by Hamas. But even though they were grieving and at war and fighting against a very evil terrorist force, they were joyful in their Purim celebration. For the first time since October 7th, Jews from border communities were gathering once again with their neighbors. The Hamas attacks had left the border communities with Gaza and with Lebanon, where Hezbollah was attacking, nearly empty. Roughly 200,000 Jews had to flee their homes and head to safety. Families with young children had to find rooms in local hotels or rent out small apartments near Jerusalem. They were scattered and spread everywhere. Nearly 200,000 Jews were basically, because of Hamas and then because of Hezbollah, refugees in their own nation. But for Purim, they were able to get together and celebrate. And when I asked them why they were able to celebrate so joyfully, even as the war waged in the background, I was told it's because God commands them to celebrate at certain times, Purim being one of them. And it's because of their faith and also what they call their resilience, their ability to endure and even thrive during times of total travesty and hardship. It's because of that faith and resilience that they carry with them that makes them able to carry on with their lives. America can learn a lot from that kind of faith and resiliency. And here's a clip from one of my earliest interviews from Jerusalem with a woman whose family members were abducted by Hamas in October. And at the time of our interview in March, she still didn't know if they were alive or dead.
On the 7th of October, my brother Yarden was texting me from the safe room. He was there together with his wife Shiri and two little boys. Ariel, he was 4 years old at the time, and Kfir was 8.5 months old. He was texting me they were going inside the safe room because of the bombing. Quickly realized it's a whole other story, and there were terrorists inside the kibbutz. He could hear them from outside his house, shooting and screaming in Arabic. He was texting me. He was really terrified. He had his personal gun, but they had automatic weapons, so he was really scared. Around 9:30, he texted me. There was a massive fire outside, and then he texted me and my parents that he loves us. He said, "I love you." And about 10 minutes later, I got the last text from him saying they were coming inside.
Her story is heartbreaking. It's the not knowing that's sometimes the worst, the hardest to deal with. So there's her story, a story shared by so many in Israel impacted by Hamas. And then there's the Joe Biden White House's story. Then there's the Democrat Party's story. And shamefully, it wasn't long into the war the Democrats started turning their backs on Israel and actually emboldening Hamas. Here's a clip from my interview with Gal Kalev, a columnist and author in Jerusalem.
The Israelis are united and resolute to continue this war. Remember, years back, the slogan was, "You're either with us or against us." This was the motto in the war on terrorism. You're either with us or against us. And now the motto seems to be fluidity. So yes, we will support Israel to some degree. We provide weapons, but then when Hamas asked, is dependent on us to stop Israel for defeating it, then we will basically support Hamas. And also in rhetoric, the inciting rhetoric, and also using Hamas talking points. For example, this whole idea that they use about the 30,000 deaths in Gaza.
One of the biggest problems Israel has had to face in the wake of the Hamas terror attack on October 7th is the slanted coverage in the media. Gil Hoffman, executive director of Honest Reporting in Israel, a group that monitors international media, says as time goes by, the world is turning against Israel because of deceptive reporting. Here's a clip of my interview with Gil in Jerusalem, and he sheds some interesting light on why Hamas chose October as its attack date, which the media, he says, fail to note.
Every day that we get farther away from October 7th, it gets harder for Israel. The reporting becomes less accurate. The word context has been tainted, but it's true that the context of this war, which is the attack of October 7th that harmed both the Israelis and the Gazans alike by Hamas, has been lost more and more. The nut graph is disappearing from the articles, and it's a problem.
Failing to include important context and historical truths while covering Israel is not just a dereliction of journalist duty. It leads to danger for the Israeli people. Alex Trayman, the CEO of Jewish News Syndicate, lays out in a wide-ranging interview at JNS offices he allowed me to borrow in Jerusalem the reasons why Joe Biden, the White House, the Democrats, and many around the world with anti-Semitic biases are really, by their waffling and trying to straddle political lines and appease everybody with diplomacy and amicable solutions, why they're actually playing into the designs of Hamas and helping the terrorists.
Antony Blinken, he came here and he said, the Gazan civilians, they're just like you and me. And in Israel, we don't feel like the Gazan citizens are just like us. They're not just like us. And they've been incited from the time that they're children to want to kill Jews, to believe that there's only one state here that's called Palestine. These are not people that want a two-state solution or would even accept a two-state solution. They want there to be no Israel in this area at all. But even in terms of what's happened in recent history, Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. And the Gaza Strip was handed over to the Palestinian Authority to govern. Within a year and a half, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas's Palestinian Authority faction, was thrown out of Gaza, with Fatah members killed, thrown off rooftops. And then in 2006, or 2007, there was an election and the Gazan people voted for Hamas.
Even for those who had been open to a two-state solution, the two-state solution died on October 7th. That's pretty much the consensus of the Israeli people. Even the Israeli people who had been more progressive-minded in their politics and thought that if they just reached out to the Palestinians in Gaza with love and compassion and provided them with medical assistance, food, friendship, and the like, that they would abandon their anti-Jew views and lay down arms and live side by side with the Jewish nation in peace. In the end, that's a recipe for eradication of the Jewish nation and of the Jewish people. In my interview with Knesset member Ohad Tall, we talk a bit about the war and how it's impossible to strike a peace deal with evil, and how this war is more complicated than understood by the West. It's difficult in America to understand where to draw distinctions between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians because they voted for Hamas, and the ones who didn't vote for Hamas voted for other groups that had similar views to Hamas. So how are we supposed to view that?
First of all, you're 100% right. It is complicated to differentiate the population from Hamas because Hamas is growing within this population. A poll that was conducted by Dr. Khalil Shkaki only a couple of days ago presented that even today, over 80% of the Palestinians support Hamas today. Over 70% justify the massacre of October 7th. It's basically saying that butchering families in their beds, that beheading little babies, raping women and then shooting them in their head, kidnapping old people and little babies, that's okay. That's a legitimate cause, it's a legitimate way of working to achieve their goal.
And meanwhile, nipping at Israel's heels is the funding that flows into these terror groups, some of which, believe it or not, even comes from America. Donald Trump stopped funding to UNRWA, a relief agency that's supposed to give money to prop up Palestinian civilians, but is actually used by terrorists to fund their terror activities. Joe Biden started funding UNRWA again, but then put a pause on it after Israeli intelligence revealed agency staffers helped Hamas commit the terror attack on Israel on October 7th. Congress, meanwhile, put teeth in Biden's pause in funding by preventing any money going to UNRWA until March of 2025. But by April 2024, Democrats in Congress and staffers in Biden's White House already started calling for lifts on the congressional prohibition and to resume funding for UNRWA. I discussed the problems of funding UNRWA with another Knesset member, Sherin Hasel, in her offices in Israel.
UNRWA sits at one of the pillars of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as long as UNRWA continues in its mission, it means that there's not going to be a different future, not for Israelis and not for Palestinians either. I'll start with the basics. And it is what defines UNRWA and its mission, which is called the right of return. And the other one is the definition of refugees, which is completely different to any other definition of a refugee by anyone else. They're literally using United Nations facilities as military bases for Hamas, a terrorist organization that was defined by the United States and in other countries as well.
In recent weeks, Japan, Australia, Canada, Finland, Germany, Iceland, and Sweden all lifted their bans on UNRWA funding and resumed sending money to this agency, mostly because of concerns about the Palestinian civilians and mostly because of compassion for all of humanity, whether Jewish or Palestinian. And the longer this war wages, the more the narrative shifts from one that sees Israel as the victim of Hamas to one that sees Israel as the aggressor. I talked with Yael Eckstein, president of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, about this while in Israel and how this skewed compassion leads to anti-Semitism.
Well, I think there's a difference between being compassionate for all the innocent lives that are being lost and affected by this war, and also transforming that into very blatant anti-Semitism. I think what we're seeing today is not just compassion for the Palestinians, but very clear anti-Semitism. And what that looks like is blaming Israel for an invasion in Gaza instead of blaming Hamas, who's still holding over 130 of Israel's hostages. The war would end very quickly if we would just get those hostages back and the terrorists would surrender.
And it's true. The alliance between Christians and Jews isn't just because of the Hamas terror attack. It's actually something that's been moving forward for years. Josh Reinstein, president of the Israel Allies Foundation and the director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, says there are 53 caucuses in governments around the world dedicated to pressing forth faith-based diplomacy. In other words, the Christian-Jewish alliance is not only formalized, it's growing.
In 2004, the Knesset made a decision to create something called the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. And this was a group of members of Knesset from left to right, religious, secular, that worked to build direct relationships with Christian leaders around the world. This later on turned into what we call faith-based diplomacy, when people take their biblical support and turn into real political action. From this establishment of a caucus here, our first sister caucus was established in 2006 in Washington called the Congressional Israelites Caucus. Still today, the Congressional Israelites Caucus is the only bipartisan pro-Israel caucus in Washington, D.C. And that establishment of a sister caucus led to a domino effect of caucuses being established around the world. So today we actually have 53 caucuses in 53 countries, 1,500 legislators in our network that works in what we call faith-based diplomacy. And today, faith-based diplomacy is the greatest weapon that Israel has in its diplomatic arsenal.
For those of the Christian faith, watching what happens in Israel is a natural. Bible prophecy, for example, speaks in large part about Israel and the world's turn against Israel. And many churches in America have followed the recent Hamas attack on Israel from a place of prophecy, looking at the news of the day and trying to read the signs of the times to gauge where we are in Revelation, in Daniel, in end times. From Israel, in a studio borrowed from TBN, I interviewed one of the leading Bible and prophecy teachers around the world, Amir Tsarfati, who is the founder and president of an organization called Behold Israel.
We strive to teach what the Bible says that is going to happen in the future, and almost all Bible prophecy is somehow related to Israel.
Right.
So if you don't understand Israel, you will not understand what is next in the plan of God. I know that in the next chapter, which is the Ezekiel war, America will not help Israel militarily. It doesn't mean that Christians in America are not going to be standing there supporting Israel. It means that America, the official, is not going to be there.
While in Israel, I also visited Judea and toured the Judean Desert Nature Reserve, land that was set aside as a park by the Oslo Accord, signed by both Israeli and Palestinian officials, but that is now being busily built up and occupied by the Palestinian people. There are scores and scores of homes, both completed and under construction on this reserve, that are illegally built by Palestinians and Palestinian sympathizers, all as a means of pushing Israel off lands, squeezing Israel's sovereignty, and ultimately expanding the presence of Palestinians into Israel. I visited a place called Ein Habasor, a community located about 3 miles from the border with Gaza that came under attack by Hamas on October 7th, and I spoke with a man who fought alongside his brother to drive out Hamas. I saw the bullet holes in the electronic gate they tried to close but couldn't because Hamas, before attacking, disabled their security systems. I spoke with a woman who is running for the mayor of the communities in the area and who described to me how on October 7th she and her family hid inside their shelter in their home and listened as the rockets and missiles flew overhead, and how they watched with shock as messages and alerts from the IDF lit up their phones with photographs in almost real time of the abducted and killed. And my final stop for my final interview in Israel before coming back to America was at Sheba Medical Center in Tel Hoshemer in the north in Israel, where I interviewed an injured IDF soldier. Daniel Kapilov, 20 years old, lost his leg fighting Hamas and suffered several other wounds to his stomach, to his arm, his face, after a booby trap exploded while he was conducting an operation with his fellow soldiers. 15 were injured. Daniel was conscious the entire time.
And on the first day we entered the Gaza, we entered the building, and the booby trap exploded. 15 people died. 15 people got injured, not died. 3 people died. And I was conscious, didn't feel the pain. Put a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. And then I got rescued in a helicopter in a hospital in South Soroka. I was in a coma for 2 or 3 months. My leg was amputated, like it was cut off in a building, but my knee got amputated. It was infected or something.
Okay.
And I got operation on my stomach.
Oh, wow.
And I had burns on my face and arms.
Okay.
And then I got into rehabilitation. Now I'm here for 3 weeks. I'm waiting for my injuries to get healed. Then I could get a prosthetic leg.
Daniel's one of thousands of IDF soldiers who've been injured, maimed, or killed since the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel. So it's really interesting and a sad commentary when you see this as polled by RMG Research. 33% of Generation Zers, those between the ages of 18 and 24 years old, do not think Israel has a right to exist as a nation in the Middle East. Unbelievable. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries, which sought the poll, said this: We are now seeing the logical outcome of an education system that teaches students to see the world through a lens of racialist resentment. Gen Z is so embarrassed about being American that a large swath of them have become terrorist sympathizers. Remember, Israel's war on terror is America's war, is the West's war, is all of civilized society's war. The chant is death to Israel, death to America, death to the West. Either America supports Israel 100%, or one day, sooner or later, probably sooner than later, America will be the next target of terror attack. Israel just had its own September 11. America is not immune to another.